We're barely 2 months into this new year, and yet we've already had 35 mass shootings devastating communities across the country. If only 2 or 3 people are killed, it hardly makes national news anymore. But we can be sure that after every major incident, Republicans will offer their thoughts and prayers and then proceed to obstruct anyone who wants to do anything to increase gun safety. Instead of addressing the serious tragedy, the illness that plagues our country with gun violence, Republicans today propose a new loophole, a dangerous loophole for so-called less than lethal devices. And once they are no longer considered federal firearms under the federal definition, protective rules go away. That means no background checks. That means no serial number on the equipment so that the police can trace it if a criminal is using it. I have great respect for the gentleman from Arizona, but using his example of that woman coming at a police officer with a knife, this bill does nothing for the police officer. He can get full access to less than lethal weapons now. But the woman, if she had a mental health problem and was barred from a federal firearm, she could now go buy one of these less than lethal devices. In fact, it's not just one woman in Arizona. There are 5 million convicted felons in this country. There are 7 million people with mental health conditions, all barred from getting a federal firearm. And this dangerous loophole is designed to assure that they now will see a giant sign saying, "Come and get your weapon," because they no longer will be prohibited from getting one of these weapons, while the police officers, the law enforcement officers across this country get no benefit. In fact, their job is made more difficult because these weapons can no longer be traced when used by one of these convicted felons who chooses to engage in other criminal activity. These less than lethal devices, as they have been labeled, include tasers, and there is one story after another, horrible story with details of criminals that have used tasers as they raped and abused their victims. Beanbag rounds. We had those used in Austin against a number of teenagers. They may be called less than lethal, but they required multiple life-saving conditions, life-saving surgeries to bring them back to decent health, and then with serious disability. And with homemade alterations which can occur to these less than lethal weapons, they can become more rapid fire. They can become much more dangerous and still untraceable weapons. There are so many things that we could be doing in this Congress concerning gun safety. Mr. Thompson has had a universal background check, not to deny anyone, but to assure that everyone who is not really with a mental health condition or some other condition, someone you want getting a gun, to assure the safety through that background check, something that's been widely supported by law enforcement. There is a concern about the weapons of war that are brought onto our streets and kill multiple people. There are a number of reasonable measures that have been advocated by one group after another across this country to make our streets safer, to have parents, when they send their children off to school, know they will come home and won't have to spend all their time fearing the kind of violence that we saw in Uvalde, Texas, that led to the deaths of so many little children. These are things the Congress could be working on right now, and instead this loophole that will allow more people who should not have a gun because of their criminal history or their mental health condition will allow them to get that weapon. Real public safety means fewer weapons on our streets, not more loopholes. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentle lady from New York, Miss Tenney.
The lady from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. It's about time that we support the Law Enforcement Innovate to De-Escalate Act. This crucial legislation ensures that law enforcement offices have access to the best, less than legal technologies for de-escalation. Under current law, certain new less than lethal technologies are included under the National Firearms Act, NFA, a law designed to regulate firearms. However, Due to the definition of firearms under the NFA, this includes less than lethal devices such as the new Taser 10. This bill will modernize the NFA to include less than lethal category to ensure that devices like the Taser 10 are not designated to be lethal, are not included under the NFA's taxes and regulations designed for firearms for use by municipalities, not individuals. I'm honored to be a co-sponsor of this bill, along with, I think, at least 22 common sense Democrats, and strongly support its passage through the House Ways and Means Committee. However, I'm disappointed that so many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle refuse to support this common sense bill. Instead, they want to politicize and talk about completely unrelated matters, while some on the other side resort to fear-mongering. House Republicans, and I said 22, I believe, common sense Democrats are committed to ensuring law enforcement has the tools and resources they need to keep our communities safe. Every major police organization is supporting the passage of this legislation, including the Fraternal Order of Police, the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, the Major County Sheriff's Association, and the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. This is a pro-police, pro-community, and life-saving piece of legislation. I urge the Senate to vote on this bill expediently, and I also want to thank my colleague, Representative Fitzgerald, Speaker Johnson, Leader Scalise, and of course Chairman Smith, once again for bringing this bill to the floor. I yield.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from Missouri reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to point out my good friend from New York talking about how important this is for law enforcement to have access to these types of taser. As I said in my opening remarks, all 50 states already have access to these tasers. And as a matter of fact, in New York, the gentlewoman who just spoke talked about their need to have them. The New York Police Department uses these tasers. The Syracuse Police Department uses these tasers. Matter of fact, their use is funded by a state grant. The Ramapo Police Department uses these tasers. In Arizona, where my friend Mr. Swikert is from, the Phoenix Police Department uses these tasers. The Mesa Police Department uses these tasers. The Scottsdale Police Department uses these tasers. This is not about providing access for law enforcement to use these tasers. They're already used in all 50 states. I yield 1 minute to the gentle lady from California, Dr. Chu.
The lady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
For the past year, Republicans have done nothing to address rising grocery prices, rising energy prices, and rising healthcare prices. But what is the one thing they are willing to do? Making tasers more accessible to dangerous people. It is unbelievable. On January 21st, 2023, my hometown of Monterey Park, California, suffered a mass shooting that killed 11 of our neighbors. It remains the deadliest mass shooting in Los Angeles County's history. Monterey Park and every community across this country deserves to be safe from violence, whether from guns, tasers, or anything else. But Republicans are working to make our communities less safe by handing over access of weapons to individuals we know should not have them and making them far harder for law enforcement to track. We should be focused on keeping our communities safe, not voting to flood our streets with even more weapons. I yield back.
Lady yields back. The gentleman from California reserves. Gentleman from Missouri.
Mr. Speaker, you absolutely cannot make this stuff up that you're hearing from the other side of the aisle. When they talk about the affordability crisis, let's talk about the affordability crisis. Gas prices are the lowest they've been in 5 years. Inflation is the lowest it's been in 4 years. Just in the first year of President Trump, wages grew more than all 4 years under Joe Biden. We are in an inflation crisis that President Trump inherited because of the spending spree, the $10 trillion spending spree that the Democrats did when they controlled the White House, the House, and the Senate. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I have a speech written for this today. I'm going to speak from the heart. As one of just a few people that have represented their constituents in Congress. I was one of the few that wore the uniform. I was one of the few that was shot while off duty. I was one of the few that had a gun malfunction when it was pointed at my head. I was one of the few that ran into the fire. I was one of the few that was on our tactical response team. And when they talk about tasers, it is a tool that we can use in law enforcement to save lives. Not only the officer, not only the subject or the suspect, but bystanders. For my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to try to defend the philosophy that we don't need those, or this piece of legislation that involves the tax code isn't legit, is just atrocious.